Mary, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us back.
Well, this was quite the session, the third longest in Iowa history, and we find ourselves here at the end looking back, and one of the things that the members of the media have been really focusing in on is how party politics played a role in this session. So what's your opinion on that?
You know, there was definitely an agenda that was put forth after the election of 2010. And there were individuals that had, they thought, a clear mandate in terms of what was needing to be done in the state and what the legislature could do and what the governor's role was in all of that. And so the governor came in with some very definite agenda items, eliminating preschool, his corporate tax, property tax proposal, a number of items that hadn't really been clearly vetted with the public. And also, I don't know that they had the support of the people in the public. I think when the governor was elected, I don't remember him campaigning on 0% allowable growth for schools. No one saw those kinds of things coming. So there was definitely a political tone during the legislative session. The anti-abortion issues, the issues regarding same-sex marriage, all of those things we knew were going to be on the table in the House because obviously they had a 60-40% control in that legislative body. We knew those issues were going nowhere in the Senate, but it didn't keep them from putting them forward and having debates on them that were pretty lengthy and pretty hostile and ugly. And I look at, again, at some point after the election, it's time to govern. And it's time to put aside the politics and to be able to work together in a bipartisan fashion to be able to get a budget done and get resolution on issues. It seemed like they were really trying to make a point to their base that they had won and they were going to push these issues through no matter what. And that's what a lot of the session was about. You saw a lot of ugly things being proposed in the House and those things not being taken up in the Senate or watered down completely or totally rejected. So, that's what we were dealing with. Politics came into play quite a bit, and there was a lot of partisanship that went on. The one area that I didn't see a lot in was on the redistricting. That was a nonpartisan issue. We have probably one of the best systems in the country in terms of how we do it in Iowa. And that was one that got bipartisan support, and there was very little debate on it.
Yeah, that went through really
it went
quickly.
Really well.
Yeah.
And then not only that, but North Carolina has modeled their legislative language to be identical to what Iowa has. They liked what we had done here and wanted to know how they could make theirs less partisan, less gerrymandering that would go on. And they had called and actually set up some sessions with our legislators and talked about how it was done, and then they proposed it and passed it through their legislative body this year.
Well, that's great that Iowa can be an example in that way.
Exactly.
There's a lot of issues that I know that are close to your heart.
Yep.
We talked in depth last time about the midwifery bill, and that was a bill that would, well, perhaps you can best explain.
What it would have done is allowed entry-level midwives. We have nurse midwives in Iowa at the current time that are able to practice and provide that service for women and families who are interested in home births. And what we wanted to do was to be able to provide another option, which would have been entry-level midwives. They are not nurses, they do not have a degree, but they would have a certification or they would have academic requirements in order for them to be able to practice.
So a significant amount of training.
Correct.
Along with education.
They would have had to go through training, and then they would have been able to provide that service to Iowans and women who were interested in that. And so there was definitely an interest in that. There was interest in both the House and Senate. The bill was brought up in the Senate this time. Last year it was brought up in the House. And we were able to get it through the State Government Committee last year. We never were able to get it on the floor for debate and get it passed. This year, something similar happened. It came through the Human Resources Committee in the Senate, and then it wasn't able to get through the process in terms of being debated on the floor. The votes were very close, and I think the folks who were opposed to it really, cranked up their lobbying efforts and got the proposal killed.
Now, a bill like this, any bill that sort of amps up over the years. You might see it return
Correct.
in another session. Were there other bills like the midwifery bill that died in this session that you might see come back?
Well, one of the ones that I've been interested in quite some time is getting rid of dog racing in Iowa. We really and truly don't have a following for that particular sport anymore. And it doesn't make sense for us to be providing an incentive for dog owners to be able to raise and breed those animals, put them on the track and run when nobody's in the audience. And what we found is an enormous decline in the interest in dog racing in Iowa. We're one of 7 states left in the country that still allow it. Most states see it as it was a money loser and something that they didn't want to continue. It is a money loser for us as well, in terms of we have payouts that we are required to provide. Those are dollars that come through the gaming industry. And as opposed to it going, you know, it could go back into the state coffers and we could set up a system whereby we would benefit from that money as opposed to having it go into the coffers of the dog owners and dog breeders. And so that's an interest that I have. There's an organization called Gray 2K that has been working to get rid of dog racing throughout the country. And they've been taking them state by state. Wisconsin was one of the last ones to get rid of it in the Midwest area. And we're, as I said, one of 7 states that still allow it. The dogs themselves are treated a lot less humanely than most of us would like to see. They're in kennels most of the day. They're out a very short period of time to relieve themselves and then to practice run. But otherwise, they're pretty much confined to those kennels throughout the day. And I don't think that's kind of the life that a dog would want or would be conducive to a good environment for an animal like that.
So this legislation would take this passing fad and say, let's
It would
move
eliminate
on.
it. It would eliminate it and no longer require it to be offered at those tracks where they have it. There are only 2 right now, one in Council Bluffs and one in Dubuque. And I think what we need to do is start educating people about dog racing and why it's not in the best interest of the public. People don't go anymore. We know that. We can look at the attendance numbers and see that they're dramatically down. And people just really and truly are not interested in that. And I think it would be serve us well to eliminate that in Iowa.
Let's talk about another animal-related issue. Let's talk about the dove hunting bill. I understand that there's ways in which bills can be presented that it's very upfront. This is, we're going to take it through committee. It's going to be right there at the top of the page. We're not going to find ways to slip it in under the radar. And it seems that this dove hunting bill kind of got slipped in under the radar. So what is the bill and how did it go through the process?
Well, you're absolutely right. And that occurred in the House, not the Senate. The Senate passed it, pretty much on a straight up, vote. There was very little debate on the bill. It came over to the House and we took up a bill that was on raccoon hunting. And so that was the bill that was proposed and on the floor. What they did was substitute a Senate file for a Senate file. And they replaced the raccoon bill with the dove hunting bill. And so that's the bill that we ended up debating, even though it had not been through the committee process. It didn't go through a subcommittee, it didn't go through the committee, and it didn't, then get a well-vetted hearing before the public. The public was 71% opposed to dove hunting, and I think the whole effort was to push it through quickly before anybody had any idea that it was going to be debated on the floor, so that they wouldn't have a lot of opposition to it, and people wouldn't be getting the phone calls and wouldn't be getting the pressure to not vote for it.
So this bill really shines a light on how the process can be abused.
And I would say it was definitely an abuse of the process. The people in the public deserve better. The reason we have the committee process and the subcommittees is so that people do have an opportunity to weigh in and have a say and to be able to get opinions out there so that we can, pass good legislation. And when something like this happens, it really and truly is just wrong in terms of how you abuse the process and how you can push things through. And it might be what your agenda is and what you want to accomplish, but it certainly isn't in the best interest of the public. and certainly not in the best interest of doves right now. One of the things that we tried to do was prevent lead shot from being used. Those amendments and portions of the bill were voted down. But the DNR Commission, then it was given to them to be able to set up the hunting season itself, and they did ban lead shot, which was good. I think that was one of the things that we were hoping would happen. The lead shot gets into the environment, and it's really and truly unhealthy for lots of other animals that eat that shot. And so one of the things we were trying to do is prevent that from becoming an issue and a factor in
and it's also less expensive.
Exactly.
So more easily accessible.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that was one of the good things that came out of the session, is that they did prevent the lead shot from being used, and it was something that I think a lot of people were hoping would be done.
Now, we talked a lot last time about funding for education. And there were some things in mid-session that were really up in the air. The preschool funding,
Right.
Funding for higher education, even vocational training through community colleges and things like this. How did it shake out in the end? What were our triumphs? What were our failures?
Obviously, the 0% allowable growth, which is our funding for schools, it's our funding for K-12 elementaries and secondary schools, that was 0% for the first time in the history of the state. And it was a year where we actually had the money. So I can understand doing that in a really tight budget year where you really are struggling to make ends meet, but there was no need to do that this year. And it was extremely frustrating. The Senate had proposed 2%. What we did end up with was 0% for this coming budget year, and then 2% for the following. And so there was somewhat of a compromise. But 0% in essence means some school districts will get less than they got last year. Some will get what they got last year, and others will get a little bit more because of an increasing enrollment. But the majority of school districts are going to be impacted by that, and it will fall back on property taxpayers because they can make up the difference there. And as a result, it really and truly is a tax increase at the local level when the state does not fund allowable growth adequately. Preschool was something also that we had on the table. The governor had campaigned on that and said that it was going to be a means test, meaning people who could afford preschool would pay for it, and those who couldn't would be covered under his proposal. What we were trying to make the case for was we don't do that with any other grade level. For first graders, we don't say if your parents can afford it, we'll make you pay for preschool, first grade, and if your parents can't afford it, then you get first grade free. Right. Or seniors in high school. We don't do that because we want to provide quality for everybody. And that was the intent behind the 4-year-old preschool program, was to provide that opportunity for all children in Iowa who wanted to participate in the 4-year-old program. It's voluntary, so nobody was forced to be a part of that. However, obviously a lot of parents were very interested in it, to the tune of 21,000 families who had children in the 4-year-old preschool. So it was very popular, very successful. This coming year, the 4-year-olds who started out in 2008 will be taking the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. They're in 3rd grade now. And so we'll actually have data that will show us whether the 4-year-old preschool worked for those kids or not. Because we'll be able to show kids who didn't have 4-year-old preschool and the ones who did and make a comparison. Did it make a difference in the academic careers of these children by participating in that 4-year-old program? So it didn't make much sense to eliminate a program before we even had the data on whether it was working or not.
Sure.
We have preschool data, which is a Dibbles test. It's a test that shows academic achievement and basically reading readiness for young children. And we had information on that it was making a difference. 4-year-old preschool kids really and truly showed a significant increase in their Dibbles scores based on the fact that they'd been in that preschool program. So we know that it really does have an impact on the lives of kids and families, and what we want to be able to show is whether it has a long-term impact. So by showing what happens in 3rd grade, we'll be able to do that. The other areas that really got hit, community colleges were probably the only area of education that were held harmless. They received what they did last year. But the region institutions were cut, the private four-year colleges were also cut. And so when you look at, originally it was a $40 million decrease to the region institutions. With the help of the Senate, they reduced that to $20 million. So they got $20 million less than they got the year before. But again, that's a significant decrease that will result on larger class sizes, kids not being able to graduate in 4 years, less opportunity for kids to meet with their professors and academic advisors. Those kinds of things are important, and they really and truly help us determine the quality of an institution. So when we lose those kinds of things, it makes it difficult. They did not do a salary bill for the regents again and for state employees, and again, that creates a situation where the only way you're able to meet your salary obligations is by eliminating or through attrition, not hiring people when they leave and leaving those positions vacant. So it has an enormous impact. The university has done a great job providing early retirement incentives, trying to manage that fiscal problem in terms of getting a reduced amount each year. But at some point, the institutions suffer. And I think, we saw some of that this year in terms of the message that it sent. It's harder for students to be able to afford tuitions, and tuitions have to increase more dramatically when we underfund them at the state level.
So in your opinion, what is the motivation behind these funding cuts?
Republicans believe in less government, so it makes sense that they would propose things that would cut government spending. One of the areas, I just saw the jobs report for Iowa today, and we're still at 6% unemployment rate, but the majority of the job loss was in the government sector, over 5,000 jobs. And so if you look at that, you see where they are pushing the less government, because they view government as bad. And so they don't want to provide the services to the people. And oftentimes what they do is, by eliminating the funding or reducing the funding, then those areas can't be effective anymore. And then it's kind of see, it doesn't work. There's not enough money there to do it. And so we can just eliminate that and nobody will notice. And unfortunately, it's a lot of the low-income people and people who have the highest need that are impacted by that. Now, on the education piece alone, everybody's for education. If you ask anybody, we're all for education. But when it came to votes this year, the Republicans unilaterally voted for 0%, and we could not get them to budge off of that. I think the governor was willing to go above that. He also came in and supported the House Republicans at the end in their efforts to just keep it at 0%.
Well, I know. I'm sorry. I know here in Johnson County, we have growth in our high schools, growth in our elementary schools. So that ultimately means we're not able to hire more teachers. Our classroom sizes are growing, and that's
we're always
concerning.
a year behind in our funding. So we do the counts one year, and then we get the money for that count the next year. And so we're always a year behind, but it means that when schools have increasing enrollment, they don't get the money then, obviously, that they need to be able to fund the teachers for the classroom. And it becomes a real problem. The governor was very successful in convincing the public that we were broke. And we were constantly saying, that isn't true. And it wasn't true. To the tune of $1 billion that we have in our reserve accounts, our rainy day fund, and surplus. It's almost a $400 million surplus. We could have funded K-12 education and a 1% or a 2% allowable growth with no problem at all. And unfortunately, they had wanted to reserve more money and keep it back for their tax cuts, because they had an agenda, and their agenda was to provide more tax cuts, especially for corporations, and that would have taken up more of the state dollars. They were not able to get that through because they could not find a compromise that both the Democrats and the Republicans in the House and Senate could agree to, along with the governor. So there is a definite attitude of less government, less taxes, and that's better, as opposed to looking at what do our taxes pay for and what do we invest in when we provide the funding for those areas. So education, healthcare, economic development. We close workforce development centers across the state. Makes no sense at all.
Unemployment's at an all-time high. Right?
Exactly. We have 3,000 troops coming back from Afghanistan. Many of those, 80% of those, are going to be looking for jobs. And here we are, we've eliminated not only the workforce development offices, but even in the ones they kept open, they eliminated the veteran position to help those veterans get back into employment. So there's some things that just weren't logical and didn't make a lot of sense, because those are good employees and people that we want to get back into the workforce. If they can't find jobs here, they will leave. They'll look elsewhere. They have families, they have opportunities and obviously obligations in terms of payments and things that they have to take care of. So the more we can do to support those individuals when they come back, the better off we all are.
Let's talk a little bit about the commercial property tax reform. That was cited as one of the most important issues. Republicans, Democrats, governor, hands down, said, we got to deal with this. It didn't get dealt with.
It did not. It's kind of one of those unfinished business items that's on the table, and I think Democrats and Republicans alike want to see something accomplished. The House came up with their proposal, the Senate came up with their proposal, and they could not reach a compromise between the two. We got a lot of feedback on the House proposal in regards to what it would do to cities. We are notorious as a state government for not always fulfilling our commitments. And I say that in a way that says we will say that we'll backfill and we'll pay for something, and then as time goes on, the support for that wanes and it no longer is there. And we end up underfunding or cutting completely the funding for a particular area. So I'll give you 4 examples of things that we've made commitments to fund that we have not adequately funded or funded at the level we said we would. REAP, which is our resource enhancement program in Iowa that provides money for land purchases, environmental programs, all of those kinds of things. It was supposed to have been funded at $30 million. We never ever reached that commitment, so they reduced it to $20 million. The highest we've ever funded that is at 18. And that was under Democratic control, because again, we felt that that was a very definite priority. Homestead tax credit. That's another area that we said we would take care of as a state. We always underfund that area and don't fully fund that, and so the counties end up having to pick up the difference, and they do that through property tax. Ag land tax credit is another one that we have never fully funded. Instructional support levy for schools is another one that we have never fully funded. So now we put another one on the table, and again, that's why it didn't pick up any momentum in the Senate, is the cities came back and said, why would we trust you? Why would we trust state government when we see all of these examples of where you said, yes, we'll take care of that, and then over time, you either underfund it or you don't fund it at all.
So help our viewers understand, when you're saying, so the state government's saying, we're going to fund this program.
Right.
They put it in the budget.
Right.
It's got a number next to it on the page. Everyone votes on it. It gets the stamp, the seal of approval, and then the money just never filters down
Correct.
to those organizations.
That's exactly right.
So there's a question of accountability here.
What they do is the next budget year, they don't fund it to the amount that they promised they would fund it in the original proposal.
Okay.
That's what happens.
So everyone thinks it's in the clear the first year.
Right.
And then the second year,
each
the ball
year
gets dropped.
Yes, or each year it gets reduced or reduced or reduced, and sometimes to the point where they can't even do the things that they had intended to do with the money. Obviously, all of our counties benefit from the REAP program, and it's extremely important to them in being able to do their environmental programs. But when you don't have the money to do that, it also, water quality, all of those kinds of things go into that too, in terms of monitoring and what we can do with those dollars. And if you don't have those dollars, then you're not able to do that.
So in some cases, I imagine there's offices that are being established, people are being put in position,
Right.
They're expecting these funds, and
they can lose their positions, people's jobs get terminated, line items get terminated,
so
all of that.
a lot of waste, essentially.
Correct.
That's interesting. That's just one of those failures of government that you don't necessarily read about every day in the newspaper.
Well, and that's why we often hear that, we'll take care of that. We won't have people pay it in property tax, but we will take care of it at the state level. Well, that's our income tax. So in essence, it's just a tax shift. Instead of it coming out of your property tax payment at the local level, it's coming out of your income tax payment at the state level.
So ultimately, you're paying the same
You're
amount
paying
out.
for it no matter what.
A little smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. It's just a shift. It's a tax shift.
Well, we're about to wind down this interview, but let's talk a little bit about the Education Summit that's coming up.
The governor has proposed next Monday and Tuesday an education summit where he has brought in speakers from around the country and even some from around the world. We're looking at some of the things that they've been doing in Finland. They have a pretty amazing program in terms of how they offer their K-12 education. And I think what we want to see come out of that, obviously, there are some things that we're doing well with our students, and I think we need to celebrate our successes, preschool being one of them, and we'll have data for that next year. But also then to look at where are some areas that we need to do a better job and what can we be doing to improve, and then prepare our kids for the workplace in the 21st century, because that's what they're going to have to be competing in. And it's not only a national market now, it's an international market. So they're not only competing with the kids around us and in all of the other states, but they're competing against the kids in China and Japan and India and England and France and Ireland and all of the places around the world. And so to be competitive in that marketplace, we need to start identifying what we can do in terms of improving the educational quality here in Iowa. One of the things that we've started with is the Iowa Core curriculum, and what we're looking at is content area and what we need to be providing for students so that they have the skills needed to be able to go on into college and then to be able to graduate and get those jobs. Because what employers are telling us is sometimes the job skills don't match what their needs are in the workplace. And so we need to do a better job communicating with our employers about what their needs are and then crafting our curriculum to meet those needs. Obviously, there are a variety of workplace skills that kids need in terms of how to work with others and that collaboration that's expected now. That wasn't always the case. When people got their jobs, they kind of did it on their own merits, and they might have worked in a cubicle and they were on their own. It's much more collaborative now, and they need to be able to work in teams and groups like that to be able to accomplish goals for a company. And I think, again, companies need to help give us that feedback in terms of where are we missing the mark and what do we need to do to improve the Iowa Core to, again, meet the needs and address those concerns and issues. We also need to look at everything from longer school year to longer school day. We need to close the achievement gap with our minority students. We know that Iowa kids do well, but we see a greater number of minorities coming into our state. And we need to address their needs and look at what we can do to decrease that achievement gap that exists right now between our white students and our minority students. That just needs to change, and we need to be looking at other places where they've been successful in doing that and craft that to the state of Iowa.
Provide for all of our students.
Exactly. I'd love us to look at education, art, in terms of art, music, and PE. We know physical education is extremely important to our students. We look at the obesity issues in the state, and we need to be providing more opportunities for kids to get that exercise and to get that energy out of their systems so that they can learn better, because we also know that that translates into better learning in the classroom. So I look at those, what they call non-academic areas, but also contribute to the overall well-being of a child and also their achievement ability.
Yeah, and when you look at, I think you mentioned Finland earlier.
Yes, yes.
I've actually read about some of the, how music is incorporated into their just general education program. I mean, we have music education classes here, of course.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that summit.
So we're looking forward to it and hoping that we can accomplish some good things. Obviously, with the hostility that was existing within the legislature this year, there's some concern about whether we can reach bipartisan compromises on anything and bring it forward and get everybody's support to do it. I think it's possible, but I think it also needs to be something where everybody's voices are heard and we get a good cross-section of people giving us that advice and that wisdom. Because there are definitely some people on the agenda that have a political agenda. There are some presidential candidates that are planning to be there that I think it's more of an opportunity for them to be on the stage as opposed to give us sages of wisdom. So I think we're going to have to be careful about some of those areas too. But I think it's always good to look and assess at where we are and then determine again what's the plan for the future and how can we improve upon a good product.
Well, Mary, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank
Thank
you
you
for breaking it all down for us here on today's show.
You're so welcome, and thank you for inviting me, Katie.